There was a time in Hollywood when two men seemed to represent everything audiences admired about American masculinity. One was reckless, charismatic, and impossible to ignore. The other was calm, controlled, and quietly intimidating. Their names were Steve McQueen and Clint Eastwood. They rarely spoke publicly about each other, they almost never worked together, and yet for decades people in the film industry whispered about the tension between them. It was a rivalry built not on a single explosive moment, but on pride, competition, and the uncomfortable reality that there was only room for one undisputed king of cool. To understand why their names became linked, you have to go back to the 1960s, when Hollywood was changing faster than anyone expected. The old studio system was fading, audiences were growing tired of polished leading men, and a new kind of star was emerging. Steve McQueen arrived like a thunderstorm. He did not look or behave like the traditional actors who had dominated previous decades. He had a rough edge, a restless energy, and a dangerous unpredictability that made every scene feel alive. Whether he was racing cars, riding motorcycles, or simply leaning against a wall, audiences could not take their eyes off him. At nearly the same time, Clint Eastwood was carving out his own legend. After gaining recognition on television, he traveled to Europe and transformed himself into an international icon through the so-called spaghetti westerns directed by Sergio Leone. Eastwood's characters spoke little, moved slowly, and projected absolute confidence. Where McQueen burned hot, Eastwood seemed carved from stone. Hollywood immediately began comparing them. Producers compared them. Journalists compared them. Fans compared them. They were both anti-heroes. They were both associated with action films. They both appealed to audiences who wanted something more authentic than the polished stars of the past. And perhaps most importantly, they both hated the idea of being second to anyone. People who worked around Steve McQueen often described him as intensely competitive. Competition was not something he turned on for a movie role, it was part of his personality. If another actor was getting attention, McQueen noticed. If another actor was earning more money, McQueen noticed. If another actor was being called the coolest man in Hollywood, McQueen definitely noticed. His upbringing had taught him to fight for everything he had, and that mentality never disappeared even after he became one of the biggest stars in the world. Clint Eastwood was competitive too, but in a different way. He rarely displayed it openly. Instead of confronting people directly, he focused on building his career step by step. While McQueen was becoming famous for explosive performances in films like Bullitt, Eastwood was steadily expanding his reputation through westerns and action dramas. Industry executives began asking a dangerous question: if you could only cast one of them in a major project, who would you choose? That question hung over Hollywood for years. One of the most fascinating aspects of their rivalry is that they represented opposite philosophies of stardom. McQueen wanted control. He fought over scripts, editing, billing, and screen time. He believed a movie star should dominate the frame. Eastwood, by contrast, often appeared less interested in the traditional Hollywood game. He moved into directing, developed long-term relationships with studios, and built a reputation for efficiency. While McQueen was battling for artistic control on individual films, Eastwood was quietly constructing an empire. The tension became especially noticeable whenever their names surfaced in connection with the same projects. There were rumors, some confirmed, some exaggerated, that producers occasionally considered both men for similar roles. Even when they were not directly competing for a part, the media treated every new success as a victory over the other. If McQueen had a box office hit, headlines asked whether he had surpassed Eastwood. If Eastwood released a successful film, commentators wondered whether McQueen's reign was under threat. By the early 1970s, Steve McQueen had become one of the highest-paid actors in the world. He could command enormous salaries and unprecedented creative influence. Films like The Getaway reinforced his image as the ultimate cinematic rebel. Yet beneath the confidence, there was pressure. Maintaining the top position in Hollywood was exhausting, and new challengers were emerging every year. One of those challengers was Clint Eastwood. Eastwood's breakthrough as a major American film star accelerated with movies such as Dirty Harry, The The character of Harry Callahan became a cultural phenomenon. Suddenly Eastwood was no longer simply a Western star, he was a modern action icon. Audiences quoted his lines, imitated his attitude, and packed theaters to see him. For the first time, some critics began suggesting that Eastwood had captured the same audience that once belonged almost exclusively to McQueen. Whether McQueen openly admitted it or not, he was aware of the shift. Friends and colleagues later described McQueen as someone who paid close attention to the industry's power rankings. He wanted to know who was earning what, who was getting the best scripts, and who was attracting the biggest crowds. Eastwood's rise could not be ignored. The quiet actor from the westerns was becoming one of the most bankable stars in America. Their personalities made the contrast even more dramatic. McQueen loved speed, risk, and adrenaline. He raced cars professionally, competed on motorcycles, and pursued excitement with an intensity that sometimes worried those around him. Eastwood projected discipline. He exercised regularly, managed his career carefully, and avoided many of the public battles that consumed other stars. Reporters often framed them as opposites, the wild rebel versus the controlled strategist. That framing helped fuel the myth that they disliked each other deeply. The truth is more complicated. There is little evidence that they were enemies in the traditional sense. They were not constantly trading insults in public. They were not involved in a famous on-set feud. Instead, they existed in the same competitive ecosystem, and each man's success inevitably affected the other's standing. In Hollywood, that kind of rivalry can become just as intense as an open conflict. One story that circulated for years involved conversations among producers who supposedly debated which actor represented the future of American action cinema. Some favored McQueen's raw charisma. Others preferred Eastwood's reliability and growing interest in directing. Whether those discussions happened exactly as described is impossible to verify, but the fact that such stories persisted reveals how closely the industry linked their careers. As the decade progressed, another difference emerged. McQueen's personal life became increasingly turbulent. Relationships, health concerns, and professional disputes began taking a toll. Eastwood, meanwhile, continued expanding his influence behind the camera. He was no longer just competing as an actor, he was becoming a filmmaker with long-term creative power. For McQueen, that may have been the most frustrating development of all. He had spent years fighting for control of his projects, yet Eastwood was achieving a level of autonomy that many actors could only dream about. By directing his own films, Eastwood reduced the need to battle studios over every decision. He was creating opportunities for himself rather than waiting for someone else to offer them. The public, however, remained fascinated by the idea of a personal showdown. Magazine articles exaggerated small comments. Fans debated endlessly about who was tougher, cooler, or more talented. Some insisted McQueen possessed a natural magnetism that Eastwood could never match. Others argued that Eastwood's understated presence gave him a deeper, more enduring power. The debate became part of Hollywood folklore. Then came the moment that changed everything. In January 1980, Steve McQueen announced that he was battling cancer. The revelation shocked fans around the world. The man who had seemed indestructible was suddenly facing a fight he could not outdrive or outmaneuver. As his health declined, the old questions about box office rankings and Hollywood supremacy began to feel insignificant. Clint Eastwood reportedly expressed admiration for McQueen's talent and toughness, and people who knew both men suggested that whatever competitive tension had existed was overshadowed by respect. McQueen died on November 7, 1980, at the age of 50. With his death, the rivalry effectively ended, yet the legend never disappeared. In the years that followed, Eastwood continued building one of the most remarkable careers in film history, winning acclaim as both an actor and director. McQueen, meanwhile, became something else entirely, a symbol. His image, his attitude, and his rebellious spirit froze in time. Because he died relatively young, audiences never saw him grow old. He remained forever the cool outsider racing through the streets of San Francisco in Bullitt. Today, when film historians discuss the great movie stars of the 20th century, the names Steve McQueen and Clint Eastwood are still mentioned together. Not because one defeated the other, but because they defined an era. They showed Hollywood two different ways to become a legend. McQueen conquered the screen through intensity and raw charisma. Eastwood conquered it through patience, discipline, and reinvention. And perhaps that is why the story continues to fascinate people. The real drama was never a physical confrontation on live television. The real drama was watching two extraordinary men chase the same crown in completely different ways, knowing that every success by one inevitably cast a shadow on the other. In the end, Hollywood did not choose between them. It remembered them both.